What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Steep Stuff Podcast. I'm your host, James Loriello, and today we've got a really exciting one for you guys. I am so excited. It is an honor and a privilege to bring this conversation to you with none other than legend Adam Campbell. The Arcteryx athlete was kind enough to give an hour or so of his time to hop on the podcast and chat all about what he's been up to over the last few years. I know you guys have probably listened to a bunch of episodes, possibly with Free Trail and Single Track with Adam in the past. Adam's had some terrible hardships in his life, and we do reflect on some of those and talk about some of the things that he has gone through in his past, but also we talk about what Adam's been up to in the last few months to the last few years, getting back into racing. We talk a little bit about his new role with Arcteryx, and just what he's got planned for what he's got coming up over the summer and in the future, some races that he would like to do to get possibly back into hard rock and things like that. So really exciting, really fun episode. The legend himself, like I said, guys, this was such an exciting episode for me. It was an honor and a privilege. Adam is such a good dude, and just a really fun conversation. I hope this is the first of many down the line. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Without further ado, none other than Mr. Adam Campbell.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live.
All right, Adam Campbell, welcome to the Steep Stuff Podcast, my friend. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, no, it's great to be on the podcast, and yeah, I love the name. Steep Stuff's what attracts me, both in running, climbing, skiing. So yeah, totally appropriately named podcast. I've been listening for a while, so yeah, thanks for connecting.
Yeah. No, it was honestly a pleasure to connect, and I really appreciate. I think you and I first started chatting back like during the time of like Meet the Minotaur back in June, when we did some coverage for that race, and we were kind of highlighting and just talking about all these just badass mountain runners in the Pacific Northwest and like British Columbia area, and it's blossomed into a lot of really solid conversations since then. So it's a genuine pleasure to have you on and finally get to just kind of chat and continue to tell your story and everything from there. So
yeah, right on. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I mean, for those who don't know, a Minotaur is a really, really cool race. Meet the Minotaur is a sky running race, and it's actually it's in Alberta, which is in the Canadian Rockies. So it's actually about 600 miles away from where I am now. But I used to live in the Canadian Rockies, and so it's a place near and dear to my heart. And it's a true mountain race, like really, really technical. I think it's like 20 or 21 miles, but it has I think like 11,000 feet of vert, and some proper like ridgeline scrambling, some like hands on feet stuff, and some like really like kind of bomber scree descents, and called the shoe shredder, which is a totally appropriately named descent because it's also limestone there, so the rock is extra sharp.
Oh wow.
And because the Canadian Rockies get really cold in the winter, the rock tends to exfoliate, and so it gets cold, and obviously it's like splinters real easily, and especially that part of the range, it's especially brittle rock, so you end up getting these like massive scree descents, which are super fun, but definitely on the more technical side of things, and definitely a good spot for a gator, put it that way.
Yeah. Dude, I've heard so many good things about that race. I've had I'm in the Front Range of Colorado, so I've had plenty of friends and teammates go up there and have performed very well. And I don't know, for me, it's definitely has my attention and something I definitely want to probably see if I can fit into the calendar for 2025. So
yeah, I'd recommend everybody go there. It's a small town. And there's actually, it's like a lot of these situations. There's actually a run store in that town. that's called Spry Active that carries all the like the raddest mountain stuff. Like they're all incredible mountain athletes, and they've managed to really curate a great product line. It's their race course, and they literally built most of the trails that you race on, which
That's
is
so
actually
cool.
cool. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. That's something actually Jackson Cole had said to me back when he was on the pod, is that like, the course itself was only built in the last like few years. So it's like tailor made for this epic race. So
Yeah. And it's a natural loop as well, which to me always has much more attraction as a mountain race, as opposed to, kind of making you go out and do these weird out and backs just to get to a set distance. It's more, this is the distance of the route. And who cares if it's 20 miles or 25, if it's 22.3, that's not where the difficulty comes from. The difficulty comes from how long you're out there.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it's crazy too, because like you do race a lot of like, the best example I could give is like one of the most aesthetic like loops that I find really interesting is like the Rut 28K, for instance. Mm-hmm. But if you were to do the 58K, there's like, the 50K, it's much more, I wouldn't say contrived, but there's a lot more added onto it to make it a 50K, if you will. Yeah. So there's just like more, I don't know. Yeah. I love these like aesthetic 28 to like 30K races that are like perfect lines, or, or rather than like an out and back or anything like that, Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. For me, I actually find that you can differentiate, somebody who comes from like a mountain pursuit background versus more of a traditional run background based on their kind of love of metrics. So if you're really drawn to the numbers and, I have to run my 100 miles or 100K, you probably come from a bit more of a traditional run background, or it's like, what's my minute per mile pace? Or you come from more of a mountain background, it's like, let's go run, XYZ peaks together. And honestly, like a 6-mile run could take you 2 hours, if you're in like, depending on the type of terrain you're in, even if you're a 30-minute 10K runner,
Exactly.
So I find that to be kind of, it forces you to think beyond the standard metrics, which I appreciate.
Stylistically, it's interesting too. Like and it's funny too, because it does give you a lot of insight to how people think and just like how their backgrounds are. Well, listen, man, I want to get into a little bit of your background. I feel like most of the people probably listening to this podcast know who Adam Campbell is. You've been around the game for a very long time.
Those numbers are getting smaller and smaller, let's be honest.
Nah, dude, you tell me. When did you first start? I mean, I know of your background, but maybe tell the audience, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, cool. So I started out in endurance sports. I actually grew up in West Africa. I grew up in Nigeria, and from a young age, you kind of, I don't know, I was always like a fast runner, and I was a guy who liked to run extra laps at soccer practice or that kind of stuff. I spent a lot of time on the beach, and you go for these like beach jogs, and for whatever reason, I really like that. And my family would also spend a lot of time in southern Spain. And so I grew up hiking in the mountains of southern Spain. They're not big peaks, but it's still, quite mountainous terrain and quite technical. And some of my earliest memories are going for like, walks in the mountains with my dad. And I found that to be maybe I'm still like trying to, claim my dad's attention or something later in life. I'm sure we can just like keep the psychological dive into that. But no, that was when I first really enjoyed moving in the mountains. It was from a young age. And then I moved back to Canada, which is where I'm from, where my parents are from. And I started cross-country running and cross-country skiing in high school. And that's when I got more into structured, organized sport, and ended up, on my university varsity swim team, track team, and Nordic ski team. And I was also doing triathlon at the time. So I basically wasted my undergrad degree doing sports because I was in all these variety of teams, and I've always enjoyed doing a lot of different sports. And I ended up making the Canadian junior triathlon team at that time and getting to train with some of the best triathletes in the world. So like Simon Whitfield was the Olympic gold medalist. I ended up being a 2-time Olympic medalist. And so I was training as part of his training group. And so I got to learn from some of the best triathletes in the world. And I was trying to qualify for the Beijing Olympics. And in about 2006, I realized that it wasn't quite going to happen for me. I just didn't have the right skill set and physiology for it. But I actually remember at that time, I picked up some running magazines, Runner's World or something, and I remember seeing this picture of Scott Jurek running in the Redwood Forest. And I don't know why this picture like drew me, but I remember he had like a long ponytail. he had this like little Cliff Bar crop top shirt. It was like Patagonia Cliff Bar, or Montreal Cliff Bar or something. A little crop top shirt with holes in it. So Jim Walmsley was not the first to do that. And he was running with his dog. He was living in Seattle at the time and it was through the redwoods. And I was like, and I was reading about his training. And I've always loved training. I was like, oh man, he gets to do what I do, but he's kind of free. I had a lot of structure in my program. And he seems like he's just so free and he gets to just go run in the mountains. And I was like, I want to do that. And so I looked up some local trail races and ended up doing a small local race. We had this local race series called the Five Peaks Series, which is across Canada, and did one of those races and ended up making the Canadian mountain running team. And then went and raced at the World Long Distance Mountain Running Championships and ended up having a good result there. It was at the Jungfrau Marathon in Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of just snowballed. Started getting attracted and doing longer and longer distance races. First 50K was the Chuckanut 50K, where I actually got to meet Scott, which was super cool. Got to turn around and shake his hand and tell him that I was here because of him, and which was really cool. And Jeff Rose won that race, and I ended up kind of in a sprint finish with Eric Skaggs.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty awesome.
Another legend.
Oh, yeah, it was really cool. Yeah. Yeah. And then from there did my first 50-mile race where I actually ended up running off the front with Anton Krupicka at White Rim 50 miler. And about 25 miles in, I remember turning to him and being like, hey, how are you doing here? And he's like, we're about 30 or 40 minutes under the course record pace. So I think we're doing pretty well. And then my AT bands just exploded on me because I by that point I hadn't really been training. Like I was really just learning. One, like sports nutrition wasn't really a huge thing. So I was, kind of fueling on nothing. And I just didn't have the legs to be able to handle it. But ended up signing up for CCC the next year and doing a little bit better prep for that and ended up finishing second at CCC, which was, that was kind of my first intro to like the bigger world of trail running really. And yeah, it kind of took off from there.
Wow, dude. What an amazing like storied, I don't know, just you've lived so many lives, I feel like, in this sport. So it's just interesting to kind of hear how you got into it and like, I don't know what you've been and since like what you've been up to and where it's going. So one of the things that really struck me, and even since like you and I started chatting, like back in the summer, like you did you're like took a little break and you're kind of like back to racing now. Like you raced 3 times in 2024 and you dabble a little bit at Minotaur and then you did like 2 other races. Like how has that experience been kind of taking a little break and kind of coming back to it?
Yeah, no, it's been good. So I broke my back and my hip in 2016. I had a bad climbing fall. I was essentially soloing, we were scrambling, but it was in, very high consequence terrain and ended up falling a couple hundred feet and broke my back and my hip. And so that really kind of changed, basically how running feels for me these days. I was still running fairly fast when that happened, but I have a bunch of nerve issues. I can't really feel my toes. So I can't run to the same degree that I used to, and especially really fast stuff. And I'm also 45 and I've been doing this since I was 17. So
yeah.
It's also quite a lot of muscles on the body. Yeah. So it's hard to pull apart what's what. And then, or am I just using it all as an excuse because I don't want to train as hard? I don't know. But yeah, so I was finding that running was just feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And, but I discovered last year that as part of a year and a half ago, as part of my healing process from breaking my hip, somehow I'd grown a bunch of extra bone in my hip socket. And I essentially had a 5 centimeter, like a 3-inch dagger growing off the bottom of my hip bones into my quad.
Wow.
And so it was really impeding my range of motion, obviously. So I ended up having that removed. And despite still having some of the nerve stuff, I found that all of a sudden running downhill wasn't nearly as painful anymore. So I got motivated to race again. And, I love the shorter races, actually like kind of being head-to-head racing. And also being less than a year out from surgery, I didn't want to sign up for any more ultras. I thought it'd be a little bit too traumatic. And I wanted to learn and see if I could get fast again.
Yeah.
The first thing that goes, you get older and is your speed. And I've always liked running fast. Even though I ended up running 100 miles later and races like Hard Rock, where speed is definitely not you're never really going all that fast in those. But so yeah, I raced Minotaur. Well, I ran Minotaur. The day before Minotaur, a friend of mine invited me to go. We ended up doing this really crazy ice climb where you rappel into this ice cave. and climb like over 200 meters out of this ice cave which forms year round.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I ended up doing like an 8 hour day, with a ton of ice climbing the day before a Minotaur. So it was not exactly the ideal race for that. So I kind of suffered my way through that. My calves were super tight because ice climbing is really hard on your calves.
Oh, yeah.
But then from there, I ended up doing a few other, local races that are, on the more technical side of things, the more mountain running side of things, which is always kind of where my heart's at. And yeah, so it's really fun to get back in there, back in the community. And the hard thing is I've done a lot of these races in the past, and so I have a real benchmark of where I used to be versus where I am now, and I'm not as fast as I used to be.
Oh, I mean,
that's totally fine. Nobody cares other than
yeah. What is so? How's training going then? Kind of like now that you've kind of, I would say almost like fixed this problem in the hip and things like that. Obviously, you've got a lot of probably scar tissue and a lot of issues from the accident. But like, how's training going now that you're kind of pretty much healthy and kind of getting back into it? Like, what's that been like?
Yeah, that's a good question. Training means that you actually have some structure to what you're doing. I exercise a lot, like I like to move in the mountains. I don't have a ton of structure with what I'm doing, but I basically do, like one harder workout a week, one or two longer efforts a week, and then everything else is kind of easy. And I get easily distracted by rock climbing in the summer as well. And so I, like to go rock climbing a little bit with my friends. And then in the winter, I'm mostly ski touring because that's the easiest on my body, and do some skimo racing, but also enjoy more adventure style skiing, some steep skiing and stuff. So it's kind of a mix of those activities. And I'm in the gym 2 days a week, and I find, if I keep that up consistently, I find my body works a lot better. So even if it's just 30 minutes of just kind of mobility work, and find being diligent with that does make a difference. And also staying on top of the shorter intervals, trying to keep some pop in my stride makes a really big difference as well, especially as I'm getting older. And because I've done so many miles of just kind of jogging, essentially like mountain jogging.
Yeah.
Trying to find things to stay fast. And I'm really lucky. I live beside like Alex Ricard, who's one of Canada's top mountain runners. And
oh yeah,
it's funny because we're kind of on the opposite end of the physiology spectrum. And so, asking him what he would recommend I do to try to get some of that pop back in my stride. And so giving me like stair intervals and like really steep, short, punchy stuff. And it kills me, but I do notice a big difference if I stay on top of that stuff. So
it's
but
crazy.
I have to take it way back though. It's like I have to be okay doing like 6 times 20 seconds, whereas my normal interval for me is like 20 minutes, or 10 minutes. So yeah.
It's crazy. Like as you age, because I'm like in my 30s now. I'm 33, turning 34. But it's just the little things that I've noticed to stay on top of, like make a huge difference, man. Like just like 2 to 3 times in the gym a week, and it doesn't have to be crazy hours or a lot of time. But same thing, throwing in strides and incorporating a lot of these like little fast things, like seem to just like work like vast wonders, as opposed to just going out and running zone 1, zone 2 for hours and hours in the mountains and just hoping for the best,
Totally. I actually have to force myself to do like flatter runs as well, because I find that really helps my turnover. So try and do 1 or 2 flatter runs a week where I'm, as you say, doing strides at the end, but not just because I live right at the base of the Chief in Squamish, which is kind of one of our local mountains. And, it's it's more or less a 3-mile round trip, about like 1,800 feet, but like quite technical and quite steep. And it's just so easy for me to default to go and run, hike that essentially. Because I like the views at the top, but, force myself to run or do some like flatter and some pavement running as well, just to keep some of that turnover does make a really big difference for sure.
Yeah. Do you think, given, and we can get into your past with hard rock and stuff like that, do you think maybe in the future it's something you'll throw your name in the hat back in for? And because I know you were in Silverton last summer, weren't you?
I was, yeah. So one of my really good friends, Andy Reid, was racing, and Andy has been he's a very good friend, but he's been a big support for me. He's actually the doctor. He's he's a sports med doc. And he's the one who found my hip injury, for instance. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm really, really close to Andy. We've done some really fun bike packing trips together, and some fun climbs and scrambles and stuff. And so when he got in, it was awesome to go there and help support him. And I got to pace him over Handy's Peak, which was sick. And he was really struggling. So I had to put down some tough love to get him up off his dirt naps and over the mountain. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Do you think maybe in the future it's something you'd want to throw your name back in the hat for and try to come back?
Oh yeah, I mean, Hard Rock would be a great race to do. I'd love, of all the races in North America, the ultras. That's the only one I see myself doing. Unfortunately, I might have to do one to qualify for it, but there's a number of really cool races like that over in Europe as well. That are just really, really hard and challenging. And so maybe doing one of those races where, if I'm going to do a 100 miler, I have to be really emotionally invested in it. And the beauty of the course or making it a destination style race would give me that emotional investment. Because it takes so much energy. You really have to want to be there. When you're doing those things, there's so many excuses to stop and to not be there. So if there's any reason to not be there, you will find it and it will like eat at you. So you have to be super psyched to want to push yourself around the course. So.
That's so true, man. That's so true. And it's like, especially, I don't know, whether you do it in the Alps or whether you do it here, like there's just, I don't know. Yeah, you have to really pick the right thing. Really quick. So this is something I was on a run semi-recently with Wes Thurman, and he's a hard rocker from back in the day. And he had brought up the story of you getting struck by lightning was it on Handy's Peak? Can you tell that story? Because I've just I Googled it to find oh my God, this is legendary. Like what the hell?
Yeah, I know. So it's one of those, it's legendary. It's also, kind of an unfortunate thing because
traumatizing.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't so much traumatizing, more as like, I ultimately, for lack of better words, I kind of fucked up, like you don't want to be in the mountains in the middle of a lightning storm. So I'm not proud of it, even though it now has some like legendary status or legendary, but it has some like lore to it. So what happened is I was running Hard Rock. It was my first time running Hard Rock. I was in third place. I just picked up my pacer, a really good friend of mine, Aaron Height, and we were making our way up to Handy's, and it was having obviously a great day. It was far exceeding my expectations of the day. And as we're making our way up to the peak, you could see storms forming off in the distance. And I even remember like commenting like, "Oh, that looks really beautiful." But he was like, "But it's way over there, nothing to worry about." It's like clear skies above us. But of course, it sort of, rolled through. The sun was just starting to set as we were getting to the top of Handy's. And all of a sudden, that top of the mountain is really exposed. It's like a big dome, and there's not a lot of rock cover or anything. And so as we were maybe, I don't know, a couple hundred meters from the summit, maybe 100 meters from the summit, we actually saw the summit get struck by lightning, and, it started to get really rainy and quite cold. So we, we put our headlamps on by that point and had our rain jackets on, and we didn't have anywhere where there was coverage where we were. And so we thought our best course of action was to get up and over and try to get to somewhere,
tree line or something,
some tree line or shelter on the other side. Yeah. And, of course, lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. So we're like, we just thought we're good. So we get to the summit, and all of a sudden it sounded like a mortar shell went off. And both Aaron, all of a sudden I look up both Aaron and I are on the ground, and I look over at Aaron. My headlamp was out at that point. And I, asked him if he was okay, and he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "How are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, that was kind of crazy," but we were both okay. But we're like, "We need to get the heck out of here."
Yeah.
But my headlamp wasn't working. So we got up, and Aaron ran behind me and sort of lit up the trail from behind me. I did have a spare headlamp with me, but we didn't want to mess around with it. We wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. And so we ran down until we could get behind a boulder, and I pulled out my spare headlamp, and I was like, "Are you actually okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And he's like, "How are you?" I was like, I'm okay. I was like, "That was really messed up." But we then said, well, let's not tell anybody at the aid station that happened, because we don't want to get pulled from the race for like medical reasons. Because I was in third and I was feeling fine. So what happened is there was a ground strike beside us, and it went obviously through the ground, and it had enough energy in it that it roasted my headlamp. Wow. So I was wearing a Petzl Now headlamp, and it roasted it, and so that headlamp didn't work anymore, which is kind of crazy. But wow. We're really lucky. It could have been much more serious, and we were definitely in a place that we wouldn't normally recommend anybody be in the mountains in. And that's the one thing with racing is, just because the course goes through somewhere, in retrospect, maybe we'd be better off to shelter under a rock before the peak. But once again, you also never know, and it's very easy to analyze with hindsight. So
yeah, and it's an interesting place to be in too, especially being, in contention for the podium on the race. You're hunting probably second place at that point. It's like, what do I do? I know the competitor in me is going to go for it, right?
yeah. But no podium spot is worth risking your life or your crew's life in that situation either. So
definitely, no, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
But what a story, what an experience, and just it's always interesting to me to hear these, like, because I'm in Colorado, I'm on the Front Range, and just to hear, I interact with a lot of. In Colorado Springs, there's a lot of old timers and just hard rockers from, the last 10 to 20 years that are still around. And, we'll tell some stories and just cool stuff that's happened in the past. And so that was one of the ones that just was like, oh man, this is a good question. I got to ask him.
In that same race, there was a Japanese runner. I don't remember what his name was, but he was running down, I want to say into Telluride, and he had some rock fall and smack his head really badly. Ended up having to get bandaged up and maybe even get some stitches in his head in the middle of the race.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a wild and tough race, man.
I mean, but not so hard that Killian can't run it with one arm. So
that's true. Was that the year he dislocated his shoulder as well, or no?
No, he dislocated his shoulder in 2017.
2017. Okay.
Killian did win that year. The year that I got struck by lightning. And that was one of the cool things about that race that year is there was it was the first year when a truly elite field came together, because you had Killian there, you had Tim Olson, you had Dakota, I think not Mike Wolf, but
Mike Foot in there maybe?
Mike Foot was in the race. Yeah, anyway, there was a number of higher profile. Julien Chaurier, who'd won Hard Rock and UTMB, and anyway, yeah. So there's a number of higher profile athletes at that race, and so that added to the the element of fun to be in the mix there.
Yeah, can you maybe talk a little bit about because you've had this what a journey. I mean, you go from third place and then having this horrific injury, falling, and then coming back not so long after and running the race again. Can you maybe talk about just that? Having to claw your way back from just mentally and physically from this devastating injury and coming back to the race and then actually doing it, and finishing.
So I broke my back. I was out in the Rogers Pass in British Columbia with Dakota Jones and friend Nick Elson trying to do this big alpine link up of a number of peaks. And, we weren't very far into Venturis when I had my accident, and as I said, I broke my T8 to T11 vertebra, and I broke my iliac crest. So I had a pin in my hip, and then I had 2 metal rods in my back. And, obviously it changed my life quite a bit, in a number of ways, some positive. It actually brought me together with Laura, who eventually became my wife. And so that was a very big positive from that accident. But, I'd always relied on my body as my physical outlet and all the emotional outlet as well. And all of a sudden you have this devastating injury and you've lost the one coping skill you have. But it made me realize that I needed to have a much richer internal life, essentially. So I started doing more meditation, more writing, and those things have served me really well later in life. And but during that time, I was still also kind of looking for meaning and purpose. And the Hard Rock lottery came up, and for whatever reason, I threw my name in it. And in December of that year, so having broke my back August 31st, in December, my name gets pulled in the Hard Rock lottery. And I was like, oh, dear Lord, I was still in a wheelchair. I was like, it's maybe not ideal. Well, I was actually in a wheelchair at that point. I'd been out of a wheelchair for a month. I'd just gone for my first ski tour, but ski tour being a very easy, walk on skis. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is maybe a little ambitious, but I mean, never hurts to try. And so I actually reached out to Jason Koop and just asked him how he would approach training given where I was at and us not knowing what I'd be able to do. And so he helped me come up with some structure. So mostly so I wouldn't overdo it in the buildup and, help adapt the training a little bit. So it was a really cool, interesting process, but mostly it was just an excuse to really force rehab. and to get me out and start hiking quite a bit sooner, and maybe even doing some light running. And so I ran Hard Rock in July, and by that point I was actually feeling pretty good. I had obviously a lot of residual fitness, and I know how to push through pain pretty well, which may or may not have been a good thing. And but it ended up actually taking a huge emotional toll on me, just because I suffered so much and it hurt me so much to do it. And I think I actually kind of set my overall recovery back by doing something so difficult so soon after.
Yeah.
I wasn't, I don't think I was emotionally, I maybe doing it for the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? I think I may have run Hard Rock that year to kind of prove to others that I could still do it. Maybe even to myself, but it, I don't know. It wasn't, even though I told myself and I was telling people that I was just there to experience the race, I really wasn't. I was there. I kind of showed up wanting to compete, because it's really hard to turn that part of my brain off.
Yeah.
And that was definitely the wrong approach, because I ended up going harder than I should have at the start, which caused, once again, I've never suffered that badly, and had that big of a mental struggle. And I think that kind of put some barriers up to me racing again, just because I hurt so bad. And I was like, I don't actually know if I want to feel like that again.
Oh man, you went to the depths of your soul, man. Oh my God.
No, I really did. And I mean, the funny thing too is I was with my friend Nick Elson, who's, this total like dark horse crusher.
Monster.
Total monster. And I remember, he was pacing me for like 20 miles, and it took us like 8 hours to do the 20 miles. And I was just feeling so bad. I was like, Nick has never moved this slowly in the mountains ever. I was like stumbling around, and yeah, it was hard. And I kind of quit mentally as well at that point, just because I was like, I ran out of reserves basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, like I just can't imagine like how you must have felt at that finish line, just like overcoming the last however many months of just destructive turmoil, not just to your body, but just like mentally. You must have been just like, I don't know, just like, how did that feel? You tell me.
Yeah, it was a huge release. It was really nice because Nick and Dakota were with me when I had my accident, and they were both able to crew and pace me. And, whereas I had the ability to, kind of process the accident, in terms of going to rehab and therapy and stuff. I don't know if they necessarily did. And, they saw me fall. Like, I think they were fairly certain they were coming to a body recovery when they saw me, which is incredibly traumatic.
Oh, yeah.
And so to be able to be there and sort of show them that I was okay really meant a lot to me. And so and also just, to be back in that community and the amount of support that you get, I've run Hard Rock 3 times. So, you end up having some really deep bonds with everybody there. So that really meant a lot to me. So it was cathartic in a lot of ways. I think if I could have just experienced the finish without experiencing the previous, like 95 miles, it would have been good.
I'm sure.
But it was just, it's just like, it's like a lot of things in life. It was 2 things, it was this incredibly cathartic moment, and it was also deeply traumatizing.
Oh yeah.
So both things happen at the same time, which is kind of life. It's interesting.
Interesting, man. Wow. So, and just like what a chapter in your life, and like what a chapter is like in your life as an athlete too. It's just, I don't know. It's cool how the history of that race and the story of that race is just so intertwined with your story, like as an athlete. It's interesting.
Yeah, right, which is why I'm drawn to potentially going back.
Oh, dude, I would love to see you go back. It would be sweet. All right, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. So we had a phone chat not too long ago regarding we talked about some stuff with Arcteryx. Maybe talk about your role with Arcteryx right now. And I also, one of the things I want you to tell too that I found really interesting was the story of how you like got connected with them as a brand, like way back in the day, like before they became this giant global brand that they are now.
Yeah, no. So that's kind of a cool story. So I mentioned at the start of this chat that I ran the Jungfrau Marathon back in, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I want to say it was 2006. Yeah, it was either 2006. Yeah, I think it was the end of 2006 or 2007. I don't really remember. One of those 2 years. And when I got back from this race, I'd done all these like local races around here, and you had like 100 people. There's like a bluegrass band playing at the finish line. Maybe they might be handing out like like a T-shirt or something. And I go to this race in Switzerland, and there's 3,000 people racing this mountain marathon. The race was super weird. You actually started in front of a Hooters, but then finished on a glacier.
Oh my God.
Europe is crazy. And as you're running, there's this tram that follows you, and everybody outside the tram was cheering. And, as I said, like I had quite a good result there. And so it was just this crazy thing. I was like, oh, this is what the future of trail running and mountain running is probably going to be like. So I got back to Canada, and I'd had the benefit of having been a sponsored athlete as a triathlete in the past, and knowing some athletes who were like, very, who really treated sport as their profession. And so I got to learn from them about how really to be a professional athlete and all the other stuff that it entails other than just being fast. And back then, being a professional athlete really meant being fast and appearing in magazines and stuff, whereas that's kind of shifted a little bit over the years. Yeah, so I literally sent an email to info@arcteryx.com because I knew them as like a local brand making incredible product that I love from from my like mountain life. And I was like, literally in the email I said, mountain and trail running is really starting to take off as a sport. I know a number of your staff and employees like to trail run. Have you guys ever considered getting into the mountain running space? And whatever, just press send, like info@arcteryx.com, like who knows? Like a week later, I get an email back from the head of sports marketing at Arcteryx saying, hey, Adam, I was just forwarded your message. I kind of know a little bit of who you are. I followed you some of the local races. We've been talking internally about this. Like, how would you like to come in and have a meeting and talk to us about some of the products we've been developing? And I was like, well, that was a great email. And so I went in, and they showed me their first prototype run jackets and shorts. And, they were, okay. Yeah, they were great. And I gave them a bunch of feedback on product. And they gave me a few samples, and same thing. I did some wear testing and just kept sending them like really in-depth emails about how the product was. And, a couple months later, I get an email saying, hey, you've been doing a great job here. How would you like to help? And so I got my first athlete contract in, that was 2007.
Wow.
Which is pretty rad to be the brand for that one. Yeah.
What a
and so I've kept that roll up, and over that time, Arcteryx has kind of dipped its toe in and out of mountain run and trail running, and because they have the same parent company as Solomon, so it's Amersport is the parent company, and I think there was a little bit of they're just trying to figure out whether or not it's a lane they wanted to play in, because Solomon was already obviously making some of the best product in the world at the time, especially, and so I had Solomon footwear and then Arcteryx apparel. And in 2016, so right after my accident, Arcteryx started to make footwear in a more serious way. And they asked if I'd be interested in helping work on their design and development side of the footwear program. And so I went full bore there. And so I've been doing that for a number of years. And then 2 years ago, I got offered the footwear program. We were working up to that point really closely with Solomon, using a lot of their, design and development concepts, and, a lot of their factories and things. And it was decided about 2 years ago that we were going to split, and Arcteryx is going to start making things independent of Solomon. Still doing some resource sharing across the brand, but for the most part, they were going to be two really separate entities for the first time. And so I was asked if I'd be interested in coming in and doing athlete insights and product testing. So all of our product comes from athlete insights. So we gather a bunch of athletes and core users, ask them what they're liking with their current product, what could be improved upon, what they're seeing as trends, like what direction things should go. And from there, we come up with a product brief. So that's essentially what I do, is I am there from the start of a product, trying to come up with some, basically passing off some ideas to designers about future some problems for you to solve. And then they come up with a design concept. You then start making some first prototypes. Then I give those out to our athlete testers who then go and try to break them in the mountains. You find out where they're breaking, and then you bring it back and you tweak them. And that whole process takes about 24 to 36 months from the first ideation to when it actually goes to market.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. And so you've kind of now taken on this, like this role as is a team captain, is the head of the team for the athletes. Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So our footwear program has been slowly increasing. Like a lot of Arcteryx things, we take our time, we try to tweak and refine, and footwear is now one of the sort of the core pillars at Arcteryx, and we're really investing quite heavily into footwear. And one of the main areas to invest in footwear is through Mountain Run. And we've had a small but mighty Mountain Run team for a while, but we're looking to expand that Mountain Run team going forward. So as part of that, I was asked to be the team captain. And so what the run team captain means is I work closely with our sports marketing team as well as our brand team. So one, that means in-house, I'm kind of like the credibility police. So when they show us stuff, it's like, does this pass the sniff test? Is this, as a run athlete, how do you feel? Is this like, is this kind of, is it too, I don't know, is it authentic essentially?
Right. Yeah.
Does it speak to you as a runner? And especially the style of runner, there's a lot of different types of runners, but like, is a more, pure mountain run focused athlete? Does this speak to you? And so I help with that kind of brand language. And then also, as I say, we're trying to expand our run team. So it's helping currently identify potential new athletes to approach who fit the kind of Arcteryx, like
it's like a brand fit.
Or you want athletes who speak to your brand. Is how they move in the mountains the way that we view mountain travel. One way isn't right or wrong. It's just this is the way that we enjoy moving in the mountains, and so we want to find athletes who are like that, and then also people who I genuinely think would be fun to spend a day in the mountains with. Like that to me, like kind of if I want my teammates to be people I'd want to go in the mountains with. So are they relatively safe? Are they good storytellers? Are they good people? Are they doing interesting things? That's really important. But ultimately, it's like how you do things matters a lot more than what you do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So many people doing really, really great things out there, but some people are just about the win, just about, crushing it. And that's awesome. But are you giving back to your community at the same time?
Right.
That to me is like what the mountain ethic is all about. You have some self-autonomy, but you're also looking out for other people with you in the mountains. So
I love that. No, and you know what, dude, I think it's too, you just hit on so many introspective things for me. Like I think the way, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of competitive athletes out there that want to win the race, but also there's, I don't know, what you do in the mountains is like your own artistic expression in a lot of ways. And I can see where you're going with that, with looking for the right people that express the right things. I don't know. It just makes sense. Yeah. I don't know. I get it.
Oh yeah. Well, so I think ultimately to me, it is what you're doing in the mountains your highest expression of mountain run. For some people that is that's racing. And that may be racing at some times a year, and then other times a year, maybe personal adventures. But for other athletes, it might be, a run could mean every time I go running, I have to have 4 points of contact. And that's your form of running. It's some people would call it scrambling or soloing. But if you're approaching with a mountain running or running lens, then you're running. Or are you looking at maps and trying to link up cool ranges? That's a form of mountain run. Are you making your own routes? Where we live, there's a lot of off-trail travel. Are you kind of, and we're allowed to do that, in parks and stuff like that. You need to be sensitive to the area you're in, but are you a good steward of the environment that you're moving in as well?
Yeah.
Those things really speak to me. Like, I'd much rather know that an athlete who was on their way to win a race heard that a competitor fell and hurt themselves, the person they're running with, and they stopped and looked after that person, then went on to win.
Right.
That matters a lot more to me. Or you see some litter on the side of the trail, you take a second to go and pick it up because that's the good thing, the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Now it matters the person you're like. It really matters the type of person and the authenticity. I think that's kind of the biggest stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And for some brands, winning and is sort of their brand identity, and that's awesome. It's cool. Like, of course, I look up who wins races. Like that is a really core, interesting part of racing. That's where community comes together. It's like one of the ultimate forms of human physical expression is, can you line up in a race and win? And you've kind of removed a lot of the safety variables, but then the other interesting thing is, can you make up your own route and do something interesting in that space? That's also super cool.
Yeah. No, I love it. So I know you can't give away too much, but I know there's some exciting shoe designs and shoe stuff coming down the line. Like I just saw, I don't know where it was on Instagram. I think it was like Believe in the Run. Somebody posted a photo of one of the new, I think it was the new Norvin that had like a sock, almost like the sock design that kind of like went up the foot or whatever. Dude, some of these things are like not only aesthetically beautiful, but like very functional. So it's really interesting to see like what's coming down the pipeline over the next few years. I would imagine it's probably pretty sweet.
It's interesting living in the future of design. I also kind of forget like what's coming up imminently versus what we're working on in the future. So the shoe you're talking about is like a lot of winter running shoes. If you look at them as a runner, they're not inspiring to run in. They're like kind of heavy, they're clunky, there's like, zippers all over them or other kind of gadgety things. And I was really fortunate to actually give one of the insights in this. I was like, can we just make the most basic, beautiful shoe that keeps your foot dry? I was like, ultimately all we want is to keep your foot dry. Can you make it light? Because all runner, like first thing you do when you pick up a shoe is you like pick it up and do this. So I was like, can we make a beautiful, simple shoe that's light that you want to run in the winter? Can you make winter running slightly more pleasant? Because it kind of sucks, especially living in the Pacific Northwest. You're running in like, almost freezing temps in the rain. It doesn't get much colder and more miserable than that.
It's true.
So can you just dial that like pleasure dial up just one notch so that you can spend an extra half hour out, and enjoy it. So that was the inspiration for that shoe. Our footwear lineup kind of breaks up into, we have, more of a performance trail shoe. Like currently we have the Cylon in line. So that's for, like faster, more propulsive, like alpine trails, which is, everybody loves running at those ribbons of single track in the alpine, and beautiful flowers all over the place. We then have another line of shoe called our Vertex line, and Vertex is essentially the intersection of run and climb. It's that really kind of little niche spot that I think a lot of us, especially if you live in a mountain town, really aspire to. Live in Boulder, scrambling the Flatirons, doing the whirl, us going up the Chief, going up and doing alpine ridges where you might be getting some 4th, 5th class terrain. So can you, essentially it's like run your climb, like what used to be a mountaineering route or an alpine route is now trail runners are kind of approaching them in light and fast ways. But so can you do that in the most secure way possible? So your feet are, well connected to the ground, but then still enjoy your running afterwards. So we have that space, and then we have our Norvan space, which is essentially for all the other mountain run adventures. It's sort of your more general quiver shoe. Yeah.
Very cool. I don't know if you could say yay or nay to this. Well, I can always edit this out if you want me to. It seems like all the brands are in this arms race, man. Like I run for La Sportiva, and we've got 2 iterations of the Prodigios coming out with these super foams. It's the super shoe Armageddon right now. Everything's coming out. Like, are you guys developing a super shoe? I know your brand, like, it seems like you guys are a little bit different because it's more solely based in the mountain running scene, like from a brand identity perspective. Like, will there be a super shoe at some point in time? Is that something you guys are looking at?
Well, yeah, we're constantly testing and prototyping, and of course some of our athletes are racing and they're saying, yeah, we need a shoe to be competitive at, so we're exploring different options for sure. We're currently testing different materials, different foams, and seeing what makes sense for our athletes to be able to feel that they have the tools that they need to perform in the mountains, because not all mountain runs are technical. some mountain runs are less technical. And so in that case, maybe you want a shoe that does have more propulsive properties, or maybe the propulsion, or maybe the foam helps reduce some muscle damage if you're going to be out for 100 miles. I don't know. But, any technology that we add into the shoe has to meet an athlete need, and be validated by our athletes. So, yeah, you're sure we're experimenting with different properties in shoes, but we won't put something out unless it makes sense.
Yeah. No.
So not putting out just to compete.
Right.
Right.
Right. There's got to be a purpose. No, I like that.
There has to be a purpose. Yeah. There has to be a sharp point to it and a real reason to have it. And if it makes sense, then 100%. I have, and the hard thing for me is I have my opinions about what I think a mountain running shoe should be, but I have a very specific style of runs that I enjoy doing. So it's making sure that what we're, which is why you need a few athletes with maybe a few different sort of backgrounds to help validate that, or to challenge your preconceived notions. Ultimately, when you're doing product design and development, one thing I'm really finding is you kind of have to kill your babies. You get really fixated on something. You're like, oh, this is a great idea. It's kind of like the Homer Simpson car. It's like, this is the greatest idea of all time. And then when
this has to work.
You're like, oh, that didn't work at all. But at least we tried it and we tested it, and that's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to see all the brands now. I don't know. There's just like so much crazy technology. Whereas like you've been in the game a long time, man. You remember back when, I don't know, Anton was running in these thin, like these, what was it? The thin,
the MT 110s.
Yeah.
I love those when they first came out. I was like, oh, this thing's sick. Yeah. Actually, there's a funny story for you. My first pair of trail shoes I got were the XT wings from Salomon.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you know what the XT wings are, but
Never heard of it.
It's actually kind of, it's popular again. That's how old the shoe is. That's like 20. It's like, yeah, it's now really heavy in the Gorpcore world. But it was this like red shoe with like black kind of flame looking like arms on the side of it. But it had this like plastic exoskeleton all around the outside. And the thing probably weighed like, well, I don't know ounces, but it was like 400 grams. It was like so heavy. And whereas I'd always worn racing flats at that point, like those minimal shoes all the time. And so I brought this shoe into a shoe cobbler, and I was like, can you shave off all this excess plastic on the side, and can you drop the shoe, like take off maybe like 10, 10 mils of drop on the shoe, and reglue a different outsole on it. And so I showed up at CCC with this shoe that I'd fully like kind of prototyped myself, and end up running half the race just worried that my shoe was going to blow apart on me. But yeah. So yeah, no, but yeah, first the trail shoes have changed dramatically, and I think it's awesome. As I say, there's a lot of different ways of people wanting to move in the mountains, and you can't argue that people are running faster than ever. And if you look at the number of people finishing top 10 at Western States, even Hard Rock, UTMB, the majority of them are wearing some type of super shoe.
Yeah.
So whether there's a perceived effort or a real benefit, it's there. So
yeah. So being in the sport as long as you have and done so many different things, like I know this is a little bit of a loaded question, but like, where do you see the sport going? Like, how do you think this is going to get like Olympic level? Like, what do you think is going to happen in the long term for this sport?
Yeah, I hope it never goes to the Olympics.
Okay.
Honestly. Yeah, the Olympics the problem that happens with sports that go to the Olympics is they end up having to really sanitize the sport.
Right.
And really change the nature of it. Like you end up having to run like looped courses, and to me, it's not really mountain running. It's a different sport. I think maybe there's a space for like cross country or trail running in it, but mountain running specifically, the beauty of mountain running to me is it is your local loop that kind of makes sense. And that doesn't fit nicely into an athletic, like into an Olympic agenda.
Yeah.
And also then honestly, having been in the Olympic stream, the bureaucracy and level of like organization behind it is just not that fun to deal with.
Yeah. No, for sure.
That kind of takes away from the soul of the sport. And we're already seeing that to a certain degree. Where I see the sport going is I see sort of two streams happening. I see there being it's going to go the way of like skateboarding and surfing and, and a lot of sort of more adventure-based sports. I think you're going to have a super highly competitive stream of people and they're going to keep pushing the limits and keep getting faster and faster. And I think that's amazing. And I love seeing that side of the sport. And then I think you're going to have a veer towards the more like free runner style side of it, where people, you may dabble in races, may get into races, but you kind of run, you're not committing yourself to one race series. Because what we're seeing increasingly is, in order to do a certain, if you want to compete in a championship event, you have to do more and more of that races series. So they kind of own it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So you're going to see athletes doing more of their own personal mountain running adventures, which is, what a lot of people have always done. And I think that's where the more community-based, runs will happen. And so that sort of less competitive stream or personal challenge stream.
Yeah. The FKTs and like that whole kind of I definitely agree with that, because I'm seeing, and you see it a lot. Like you said, the UTMBs of the world, if you want to run UTMB, you got to do their races. If you want to run, let's say you want to race the Golden Trail Series final, you have to do a handful. You have to get the qualifying points to go do that. And and having talked to a lot of race directors, like even like Julian Carr recently, who I just talked to, who has the Cirque Series, like he's kind of starting to look at the possibility of having some sort of final and stuff like that. So it is very interesting to see the sport starting to consolidate one way or another on these short course, mid course, and then eventually long course, if you will. And then you'll have that hyper competitive side. And then, you'll have this like, I don't know, more artistic expression, kind of like climbing kind of screams to me like that, where you'll have this speed climbing and all of the stuff that's in the Olympics versus, your Alex Honnold's of the world that still do incredibly fast stuff, but it's more outside. It's not centered in a gym. It's less performance based, even though it's like incredible achievements, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, it's a mixture of different skill sets. As you say, I think you said you need to, it's more artistic. You need to be able to create your own lines and maybe also have like a slightly broader skill set.
Yeah.
You need to be able to assess danger and risk. You need to be able to figure out like where your crew might meet you if you have a crew for an event or for a run. You then also, if you want to actually be a professional in that space, you also need to be a great storyteller.
Yeah.
Because, what I do that's rad in my backyard, how do I convey that to a broader audience? It's really, the only way to do that if you've never seen what I'm dealing with is either you have to show beautiful images, make a great movie about it, or be a great storyteller. Race results kind of tell their own story. And that's why a lot of brands tend to default to that, and a lot of athletes tend to default to that. It's kind of it's a bit of an easy path. It's very easy to, exactly. The ranking exists at the finish line.
Exactly. Yeah.
But where the real depth comes is, can you pull the 15th place finisher out and tell that person's story? That is sick.
Yeah.
To me, because everybody who finishes those races has had a journey and has had a cool story. I'm just as interested in that story as I am in the person who wins the race.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting too. So this is something I've been having a lot of conversations with whether race directors, with athletes, with all kinds of people. It's like, especially on the sub ultra side, I think ultra does a really good job at being able to tell the story of people, the front of the pack, the middle of the pack, and the back of the pack. But I think in sub ultra, we do a very poor job, if a job at all, at telling anybody's stories. Yes, you know who the Joe Grays of the world are, you know who your Christian Allens are, and some of the guys and the gals running in the front, but it's so competitive and so hyper competitive. I feel like now not a lot of stories are being told at all. It's more of performance and less of the person and the training and what goes into it and just the stories, if you will. So yeah, it's interesting to see like how that's, hopefully we can change that and to do more better storytelling in general, same with FKT.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's kind of a two-way street though. I also think it's a little bit incumbent on the athletes to tell their stories as well. The only way to, ultimately you're the best. And we live in a time now as athletes where you have these incredible platforms where you can kind of be the author of your own story.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a lot of power in that. And I'm actually surprised, for instance, that if you look at triathlon, a lot of athletes have vlogs where they really sell their kind of lifestyle and their journey quite carefully. We don't really see that. I mean, I personally wouldn't want to have a camera crew following me around constantly. But if I was trying to make my living solely as an athlete, we have some incredible personalities in the sport. If you were able to capture that and share it in a slightly higher production value way, that'd be amazing. Like I followed, there's a Connor Young's Road to Paris series.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought it was incredible on YouTube. Like he was vulnerable, showed his good workouts, his bad workouts. He's a very wholesome person, in their presentation, and I thought he did a phenomenal job in like really bringing you into it. And I think that there'd be a lot of room in trail running to do the same thing. I think that's something that Killian did he didn't necessarily do it himself, but like that whole
Solomon series, yeah.
the Solomon series, the Killian's Quest series, they did a very good job of bringing you into it and showing the athlete outside of racing.
Yeah.
And those things really spoke to me, and they were a huge inspiration into my move away from racing necessarily into the broader mountain ranges and developing my skill set into more steep skiing and alpinism and rock climbing. So yeah, I do think that there is room to venture away from that. And once again, it's not necessarily new because people have been doing this stuff for a very long time.
It's true.
But I do think it's giving people the space and platform to show personality instead of just showing the results would be huge.
Yeah, no, I agree. Not to double back to the Olympic topic, but one thing I did want to say, because you had said something earlier about skimo racing, was almost like, I feel like having hung out now with so many ski mountaineers and like potential skimo Olympic hopefuls, like I feel like skimo in the Olympics kind of turned me off a little bit, just like what they did with it, getting rid of there's no vertical race.
The vertical race isn't even the most interesting, like doing the individual races, longer form races like that. That is skimo. I understand why they did that. So the problem with, skimo obviously is you have to be in the mountains. You have to have a certain amount of like elevation gain. Whereas with these shorter sprint races, which is the format that's coming in the Olympics, you can do that in the Midwest. Like you could do that in, trying to think of somewhere, but even like somewhere in Michigan that has like a small hill, you can just do laps up and down that thing and you can make a sprint race there. So it is in a way making the sport more democratic, but there's no, like the Mo and skimo is mountain. There's no mountain in what they're doing. They're doing a sprint race on touring gear. But it's not, there's no Mo in what they're doing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was disappointing. And you could even draw the same or similar assumptions with like, it was even climbing too, like what they did with some of the things with climbing. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, they kind of forced a format on climbing, like forcing speed and bouldering. And they did that with the idea of being able to separate the disciplines, ultimately get more medals. And hopefully skimo is thinking the same thing. They have some success with this first format, that they can then broaden it to have more variety of events. But I also think the IOC doesn't like having races or events over, like 20 minutes. And a skimo race is, anywhere from an hour to 3.5 hours, depending on the format and length of the race, or multi-day.
Which could be crazy too.
So anyway, it is too bad. Mountain biking kind of went through the same thing. Like mountain biking became these loop courses instead of like a big natural loop, which is what racing used to be like. And so I think the Olympics is an interesting avenue. But we would be dealing with a very different discipline and sport if we were in the Olympics. So.
Yeah. Well, it's different too. Like we're not track and field. It's more, I've heard Doug Mayer, I've heard a lot of people say this, like it's a soul sport, it's just it's hard to put that in a box, or just, I don't know. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So listen, man, one of the things I found really interesting, and I've heard this on podcasts that you've been on, and even in some of the conversations that we've had, like Alex Brickle, like some of the people, like what is it like living in Squamish? Like every professional athlete that's like the man or like the woman that like some of the best in the world in their respective modalities, like live there. Like, what is that like? Is that crazy?
Yeah, it's super cool. So I've been fortunate to live in a couple sort of, mountain capitals. So I used to live in a town called Canmore, Alberta. And Canmore is where, that's in the heart of the Canadian Rockies. So it's one of the best ice climbing places in the world. Some amazing, like big mountains, like big glaciated peaks and things. And also some of the best sport climbing. And it's where the Canadian National Nordic Ski Team is based. And so that was really cool, being this sort of high performance mountain environment that way. And then Squamish is called the adventure sports capital of Canada. So like I live on the ocean, but then I've got, like 2,000 meter peaks right behind me. So that's, 6,000 feet. and they're like heavily glaciated peaks. We get some of the most snow in the world. The Squamish Chief is kind of like the Yosemite of Canada. So we've got all this incredible rock everywhere. So as a rock climber, it's incredible because we've got all these glaciers that are high up. Some of the world's best kayaking, it also happens in Squamish.
Wow.
And then Squamish, because we're in this rainforest environment, the forest regenerates really quickly. And so trail builders can kind of build trails almost anywhere, and the forest reclaims it if they let them go. So we have these incredible mountain bike trails as well. Truly world-class mountain biking here. We're in one direction, we're an hour from Vancouver in one direction, and then about 40 minutes from Whistler, which is one of the biggest ski resorts in the world, in the opposite direction. So really is just a paradise of everything. So, you know, most days I'm doing one or two different sports just because I have access to that kind of infrastructure. And because we live in such a rich environment, you know, natural environment, we have incredible athletes that get drawn to be there. Also being close to an airport makes it a bit easier as well. So like my next door neighbor is a professional snowboarder. You know, there's a number of professional skiers who live in my neighborhood. Quite a few professional rock climbers or mountain guides and ski guides. So yeah, it's a really, really amazing environment to be in. But at the same time, it's also one of those funny places where, you know, your perceived level of what people do is bonkers. You know, it's like, yeah, you know, if you're not like a 512 climber who can run a 15-minute 5K and also, you know, maybe surf and big mountain ski, you're kind of an average athlete. You're like, well, that's kind of not right. Yeah,
the level is so high.
Oh yeah, that's just actually, this is a total segue. But the most interesting athlete to me is, you know, Hobbs Kessler. Hobbs Kessler is an American Olympian in the mile.
Okay.
So he's whatever. I think he's run like a 350 mile or maybe faster. But he's also used to be on the U.S. national climbing team.
What?
As a junior, yeah. So he's a 5:14 climber who can run a sub 4-minute mile, like easily.
Freak athlete. Oh my gosh.
A total freak athlete. So I think one of his challenges was to try to climb a 5:14 and run a sub 4-minute mile in a day. And if he's able to do that, that to me is like total next level. Because those are also like quite different skill-based activities.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But being able to do both of those in a day would be a pretty sick challenge. So,
oh my gosh,
I hope he goes after it because that'd be sick.
Yeah, that would be cool. What a diversified athlete! Like so cool. Like you don't meet too many people that can do something like that. Like usually there's like that aerobic crossover where Nordic skiers will be great trail runners or vice versa, but very few climbers to runners. That's different.
Totally, yeah. If I had my pick, if I could pick my own like kind of development team, I would pick NCAA or that level Nordic skier, you know, like the people finishing, you know, 10th through 5th at national cross country champs or cross country ski champs who have a bit of a running background and put them into mountain running. And I think that the sport would just like, dominate. Yeah, their aerobic capacity is incredible. We've seen that a little bit in Europe with skimo athletes, but I think Nordic skiing has that extra level of like professional training behind them.
Yeah, bigger engines. Yeah.
The engines are they're just more developed from a training perspective that they can apply that to trail racing. Yeah, I think and you're already seeing it with people like Sophia Lockley and
David Sinclair. Oh my
gosh.
David
Sinclair, David Norris is another one.
Yeah. I had the misfortune to get in a race Norris this summer at one of the Cirque Series races. Kid's a monster. That's so good. Oh my God. Disgustingly. Monster, and like really good on technical terrain. Like so good on technical terrain. Yeah.
Well, a lot of Nordic skiers, and it was from a really young age, do these really long, just running in the mountains with poles in quite technical terrain. And they typically live in more mountainous towns. So whether you're in Vermont or somewhere on the East Coast or Alaska or, so they're used to moving in that type of terrain. And, you can really tell the difference between somebody who grew up moving in the mountains from a young age versus somebody who moves to it later in life. There's just like this fluidity and effortlessness. They know, they know what rock's going to move underfoot from just intuition. Like any of my friends whose parents are mountain guides who grew up going into the mountains just have this like ease in this in that environment that is really hard to replicate and learn later in life. And, there's people like Killian have that,
Yeah.
they just sort of know, how to move in the mountains, and it's really beautiful to watch.
Yeah. But, dude, what was that like racing him? I think you might be the only person I've ever spoken to that's actually raced him. Is it crazy? Like, is he, I mean, it's at a 100-mile race, so it's a little bit different, but still.
Well, yeah. So my second year running Hard Rock, I finished third the year before, and I was like, well, I trained pretty well. I was like, I know I can podium, if I have, if I execute. But I was like, well, let's just see what it's like to run with the best mountain runner of our generation. And so I took off and ran. I was like, let's just see how long I can run with Killian. So I ran 50 or 60K with him, which was very, very nice of him to let me run that long with him before he decided to suddenly peace out. But I was holding him back and he wanted to go, or he was starting to get cold or something. So he started to speed up. But Killian's a really wonderful, very genuine person. He's a really smart guy. So ended up having just great conversation, really nice conversation with him. And yeah, I've interacted with him off and on over the years as well. I ask him, what product, we've talked product over the years and sort of route selection, and just because we also share a love of sort of light and fast mountain travel, whether on skis or climbing. So yeah, we shared some data over the years. And when my wife died a few years ago as well, he reached out in a very empathetic way, which I really, really appreciated. He suffered loss and trauma in the mountains as well. And so he had, I don't know, he just had maybe he'd had a window into what I'd experienced, even though it was different circumstances. But so he sent me a very empathetic note at that point as well. So he's just a very, very kind person who's also just a truly fierce competitor. And the cool thing about him though is he really wants to raise everybody's level. He'll use competitors to push them. He also wants to be racing the best athletes at their best, which I really admire that. So.
Yeah, he's an interesting character, man. You meet these people in our sport. The Anton, even Anton, has been able to completely reinvent himself, and Killian's on this new chapter. So it's interesting to see kind of this old guard, kind of, I wouldn't say reinvention, but in another act in life, doing different things. So it's still making a massive impact on the sport. So it's very cool.
Well, I think you have to, though. I think it's important to re-examine and I think you want to evolve. I mean, it'd be pretty sad if I was the same person I was when I was 20.
Right.
That's true. I think he was an okay guy, but I'd like to be a little bit better. And time evolves, life evolves, and your interests evolve, and hopefully your skills expand over that time as well. And so, whereas I may not be as fast as I used to be, I am a much better all-around athlete than I used to be in so many ways, and that's super cool. I mean, I'm turning 46 and not to, in a couple months, and to say that I'm a much better athlete now than I was when I was 20 is kind of an amazing thing to say. And that's just the story of evolution. And it's also just a story of acceptance. My body doesn't work the way it used to. And so I could sit there being really sad about what I can't do anymore, or I can evolve and adapt into things that I can do now in a more proficient way. And it's fun to be improving at things as well. Yeah. I'm still becoming a better rock climber. So it's really fun to invest in something I'm improving in. But the balance to me there as well, though, is, and I often wonder this, as I'm getting back, and finding some love for running in a new way, is, am I genuinely tired, or physically sore or beat up, or am I using my age and previous injuries as an excuse to not try as hard?
Ooh.
And it's this really interesting balance that I'm constantly weighing. So is it? Yeah, it's, and sometimes it could be both.
Yeah.
It could be an either or thing, or if and yeah. So it's a really interesting balance that I play in that space. Yeah.
Dude, that's interesting. I had Joe Gray on the podcast not too long ago, and he said something kind of similar. He's like, now that I'm over 40, he's like, yeah, I can make excuses for this if I have a slow day, or if I feel this, and if I just, just want to go for instead of competing against everybody else, just compete against the other masters. He's like, but I can't do that. But he's like, you can always use that as a crutch. And I was like, oh, that's a weird way to think about it when you turn 40, No,
it is totally. Yeah. And you hear people, we say this all the time. It's like, oh, I'm 30 and I'm getting a little bit stiffer. I'm 35, I'm turning a little bit stiffer. I'm 40. But I'm like, ultimately it's, what can you be the best version of yourself now?
Yeah.
And honestly, like, who really cares if you're winning versus if you're finishing third? I'd much rather finish third against a quality field, know I had my absolute best race, than win and sort of not really try all that hard against an average field, or even finish. Honestly, I'd rather finish 60th at a race, know what I gave it my all of the day, and train properly and execute the best race I could on that day. Of course, it's fun to win, but it's like it's ultimately not what it's about. It's like, I'm a really curious person. I love exploring, and that means exploring what my limits are now. This is who I am now. So what can I do now?
Exactly. Well, speaking of now and in the future, what do you got planned for the summer? You got anything coming up you're starting to put together?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm currently weighing that out. I'm going to do some schema races this winter, and then I'm debating whether I want to run a 50K and 100K, but if not, I'll keep doing these shorter, more technical races, which I really enjoy doing. They work on a number of levels. One, they force me to run faster, and then I'm not so destroyed, but I can't go and do my own personal mountain adventures as well after. The 100 miles, they do take a little bit of time to recover from. I know Carl Meltzer, you can bust one out, every now and then. Like
one a week. Yeah.
One a week, exactly. Yeah. No, if I'm running 100 miles or 100K, I like to really invest a lot of time and energy into it. Whereas these shorter races, I find that I can, you still need to train really, really hard, but I don't feel I need quite as big a build-up for them. I can kind of fit them in on a more regular basis, and they're still a little bit easier to get into as well.
That's true. It's true. You don't have to wait for a lottery.
There's always that part of it. So, I mean, I have some personal projects around the Sea to Sky area I'd love to do, and they're a little bit on the longer end. So I feel that I'm now trusting my body enough to, start to believe that I can actually do them, which is really cool. And then, maybe run an ultra at the end of the year if the motivation is there, with maybe an aim to get into hard rock again in the future. So.
Oh man, I'd love to hear it. That's amazing.
Yeah,
well,
thanks.
listen, man, I don't want to keep your entire day, so I want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was an honor and a privilege, and I hope we can do this again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks again for your interest. And as I said, we're starting to really build out our mountain running team, and look forward to if any young athletes are reach out. Always stoked to hear what you guys are up to, and anybody has any cool projects, let me know and see if maybe we can find a way of possibly supporting them in the future. And we have some really cool product, and I'd love for you guys to go and check it out as well. I'm really proud of what's coming out in 25 and 26. So just keep an eye out, and I think we're going to be doing some interesting things. So.
I love it, man. Well, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
What'd you guys think? Oh man, what a great episode. Adam Campbell is such a good dude. And just like I said, a really fun conversation. Exciting to hear about what Adam's been up to and what he's got planned going into the future. It was just a great one. It was a really fun way to start off 2025 with the great conversation with the legend himself, Mr. Adam Campbell. Guys, before you get going, do me a favor, hop on Instagram and give Adam a follow. His tag is, handle, if you will, is Adam, ADAMO at 1979. Give him a follow, shoot him a DM, let him know what you guys thought about the episode. Or if you are interested in or have any questions for Adam, regarding Arcteryx or anything like that, shoot him a DM. I'm sure he will get back to you guys with some of your Q&A. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, it would mean the world to me if you could give this a share on Instagram, so that way we can get this out to the world, as well as a 5-star rating and review on Apple and Spotify, so we can continue to cover the great sport of sub ultra. And we got some big plans in store for you for 2025. It's not too much has been reported on yet, but some cool stuff down the pipeline. So have a great rest of your week, guys. Thanks so much.